Hey guys, it's Miss Clark. I'm going to be teaching you the Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 reading lesson. And our I can statement is I can identify words and phrases that suggest character feelings, and I can describe how a character's feelings change over time. Okay, so we're going to continue reading about Henry's Freedom Box. Okay, so some of our words that we're going to be focusing on this week are we've got soar, we have warehouse, we have bittersweet, we have beckoned, and we have steamboat and burst. All right, so those are our 6 main vocabulary words. They should be at the very front of your packet. If you're a remote learner, then they should be the second page. Okay? All right, so today we're going to talk about things that the author did really well in the book. Okay? So she used her words really well to show us how Henry was feeling throughout the story. So as we reread today, we're going to stop on a few key pages and see how the author's words show us how Henry was feeling. So now, we're going to turn to this page in our packet, and it's Tuesday 2-16. So you should be in this one. And there's an I do, we do. We're going to do this together. And then I'm also going to do this with you as well. And then you do, you're going to do the last part. Okay? So, also, you're going to do the character change. You're going to describe his feelings when he was enslaved and then describe his feelings when he was a free man. So first, we're going to do the character feelings. Okay? So, I'm going to remove this page for right now. And we'll flip it back over. All right, so Henry's Freedom Box. Okay. So, Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. Okay. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe the master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Okay. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves don't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. Okay, so how was he feeling at this point? If he's humming on the way home, humming usually indicates singing, like happiness, right? Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another, and another. Henry knew they were both very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell all our children," she said. Henry sat very still. All right, so that was one of our quotes in here. It says, months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. Okay, so how is he feeling right now? Okay, so if he's getting ready to get married, then usually that means that he's pretty happy, right? So he's excited. He's happy. Okay, so And then text evidence. How do we know? Because both their masters agree Henry and Nancy were married. So Henry knew that they were very lucky. So he said they were very lucky. All right, go ahead and pause the video if you need to. Okay. If you want to add anything else, that's up to you. And now I'm going to continue. All right. So Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No," cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco." The boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves were tied together. The owners shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father, father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy, too, was gone. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. All right, so back at the other page, it was talking about his friend James had come into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." So now, how is Henry feeling at this point? Okay, so how's he feeling right now? He's probably feeling scared, probably feeling anxious again. What else? Maybe a little angry. Okay, so how do we know this? He couldn't think, he couldn't work. Okay, so he couldn't think or work. That can happen either when you are scared or angry. A lot of times that happens during both instances. Also said his heart twisted in his chest. So we could say twisted heart. Okay. Go ahead and write that down. Don't forget to pause it. All right, so let's go back to where we were. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky. And Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted the crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and hope," Henry said. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia." Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up with care." Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, and Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitriol. "No," cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. The sun was not yet up when Henry climbed into the box. "Ready," he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed a paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again. Upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst, but he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. All right, so I want you right now at the bottom of your paper It's that quote, hours passed, Henry was lifted up and thrown again. So I want you to write his feelings, okay, and then the text evidence. So go ahead and pause the video. Okay, all right. Now that you've completed that section, we can keep reading. I'm tired of standing, someone said. Why don't we move that box and sit on it, said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side, now on his left, and suddenly right side up. What do you think is in here, said the first man. Mail, I guess, said the other. I am mail, thought Henry, but not the kind they imagine. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling sound of the train wheels. He awoke to loud knocking. Henry, are you all right in there? All right, he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Box Brown. All right, so now I want you to move on to the next assignment. And I want you to complete this either on your own or with a partner. And it's Henry's Freedom Box character change. So you're going to describe Henry's feelings when he was enslaved and explain why he felt that way using details from the story. Right in here. Okay. Describe Henry's feelings once he was a freedman and explain why he felt that way using details from the story. Okay. So after you have finished that page, you are all done. And I will see you guys at another time in another lesson.